Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Welcome to another episode of Missing Frames. This is the podcast where we watch all the movies we should have seen by this point in our life. You know what? No, I'm going to take that. This episode is the exception to that. I'm not sure this is a film anyone should have seen or wants to see or even has seen, judging from the box office numbers. But I really don't know how I got into this, and frankly, I blame my co-host and dear friend, first time appearing on the show, Matthew Schott. Matt, welcome. Why is this happening? Can you explain this to me?
I can't. I have not seen this film, so I have very little to bring to the table in describing what this is, how it is, why it is. But I do know that this is the first female-led superhero movie. If you don't count that Batwoman movie that came out in the 60s, but since they legally had to change the name.
Wait a second. You're telling me there's a Batwoman movie and we picked Supergirl? What is this?
Hang on, because it's not Batwoman. It's Batwoman. It's a different character because she's like a bat. She's a vampire. And I was reading about it when I was trying to figure out what the first female superhero movie was. And because I remember hearing like the wacky adventures of Batwoman or whatever, and I looked it up, and it came out right at the same time as the Batman TV show, and they literally just called it that so they could like market off of that, and then they got sued by DC, and they had to change the the movie's title to something like The Flirty Vampire Who Kills. It's called something like that in all releases now, so it doesn't really count.
But it really sells the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we kind of should watch it supplementary, but
I think we messed up here. But that's true. This is I guess the first big budget superhero film focused on a female, and since this is the opening weekend of Captain Marvel, we figured we would celebrate by having two guys coming to talk about women's rights, femininity. This is what the internet wants. So congratulations, world. That's what you've got. We picked one of the worst movies, I think, on the face of the planet. It has a whopping 10% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Ooh.
I have seen it. But I saw it when I was so young, and I just wanted anything remotely related to Superman. And I guess my parents just were like, well, he's seen all the other ones. Let's just get him.
This is exactly what they were banking on. This is why this movie was made.
I think that's exactly what happened. And the story of this movie being made, the production history of it is so nuts. So it was the Salkinds, when they'd purchased the rights for Superman to produce a live-action Superman film, they also got Supergirl. And I guess what happened was, after Superman 3, which I believe was released in 1983 and was not nearly as much of a critical or commercial success as the previous Superman films, I guess the Salkinds tried to find a new outlet for how they could maybe milk the franchise. And they decided, hey, we got Supergirl, let's do that. And that's what they did. And it was released the year after Superman 3 and features no cast members from Superman except for Mark McClure, who played Jimmy Olsen. Everyone's favorite
I didn't know
character.
Jimmy Olsen was in this.
Well, I'm sorry to spoil it for you. I guess I should have warned you.
Is it gritty Zack Snyder, Jimmy Olsen?
Yes, he gets shot in the first 10 minutes, and it's exactly the type of family-friendly entertainment that you would expect from the year 1984, the year that gave us Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. But I find it hilarious that this film did as badly as it did. That no one wanted to be involved with it. Apparently there were conversations to have Christopher Reeve involved, but they fell through, probably because he was like, you know what, on second thought, maybe not. But the movie, beyond being such a failure, it didn't make any money. It kind of paved the way for, I guess, Superman 4's failure, although frankly Superman 3 did a pretty bang up job of that too. But I don't know. Matt, tell me what you know about Supergirl. I mean, have you seen any clips? Do you know what the movie's about?
Oh, I'm sure I've seen, I love, like, bad movie culture. I love, like, absorbing bad movie stuff. And I'm sure I've seen some, like, hacky YouTuber at some point being like, this movie is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. But,
That's a
like,
pretty good impression of me.
Yeah, you're welcome. I don't know, though. Like, I think so much of it just, like, gets a wash in my brain with, like, your, like, Elektras and your Catwomans. Not to say that, like, every movie with a female-led superhero is the same, but I think a lot of those movies make the same mistakes because they're being made by, like, a bunch of, like, 50-something, like, white dudes in a boardroom who are like, what are the kids like? Oh, God, I don't know. They want girls, so make sure she's got her titties out and make sure she's bankable. And,
That's
like,
a pretty good impression of me too.
Well, good, because I can't speak for the rest of the podcast because of that. So I think that, like, like when I think of this movie, I'm like, is this the one where she's got the bad guy's got diamond skin? But that's Catwoman. So it's not
Wait
this
a
one.
second.
I think that's the plot of
amazing.
Catwoman. I think in Catwoman she gets, like, it's like a makeup manufacturer because of curls. They're like, what do girls like? Makeup? That's what it'll be about.
Diamonds and makeup.
So, like, the bad guy in Catwoman, I believe, makes a skin cream that turns her skin to diamonds.
This sounds absolutely fantastic.
Supergirl is weak to wood, right? Isn't that her weakness? That if somebody hits her with a stick, she dies.
That's news to me, man. I
might be thinking of Power Girl, who is Supergirl from another universe.
I remember very little about this movie. I remember it opens with, like, it's like the goofy, not Krypton. It's like the neighboring planet to Krypton, I think. And I guess a couple spoilers. I hope this doesn't ruin the film for you.
It will.
I know in the opening she there's like a mechanical butterfly that is her toy, and it somehow destroys something, and there's some orb that escapes that she needs to go get. It's so ridiculous. And I also remember she disguises herself by she changes her hair color, and she wears glasses. I guess they were like, well, it works for Superman, but this, we had to make it a little more believable. And I know when she flies around, it's extremely ridiculous. It's like she's like very like it's like a ballet, and she's very overtly feminine when she flies, and that's what I remember from it. And I remember she, like, falls in love, and
Of course.
And what's her name? Faye Dunaway is an evil bad guy, and that's what I know. The wood stuff I have no memory about. But I
might be thinking of Power Girl.
I can only hope you're not, and I can only hope it's in this movie. But yeah, I think it's fantastic. This was also directed by the man who did Jaws 2, Janat Zwark. I can't. Szwarc. Zwark.
Okay.
Let's just go with that. So there's that, and that's about it. I mean, really, the fascinating thing about this is just how badly it did. It had a $35 million budget, and it made a little over $14 million.
Wow. That's impressive. I mean, like, I am so fascinated by every, like, pre-X-Men superhero movie because with the exception of, like, the huge smash hits like Superman and Batman, which are both movies I'm not a big fan of, I think that, like, nobody seemed to have any idea what they were doing or, like, how to tell that story on film. Right. Even though I think Superman lays out a pretty easy groundwork that you can just, like, kind of copy. But like, I'm so fascinated by watching people just be like, I don't know, She flies. We have an entire 30 years of characters to pull from, but let's just make up new stuff.
That's always my favorite. That happens a lot with, as you know, video game adaptations. For some reason, they look at the video game, even with a movie like Max Payne, where it's the game was a pretty straightforward plot. It was weird, it was disturbing, and then the movie was like, you know what? Let's just do something completely different, and it's terrible. And I'm like, look, you had a plot that was just it was tailor-made. You could have just taken out the things you didn't want, but you could have just kept that almost verbatim, and you didn't.
Stuff like Mortal Kombat, let me just say, is very faithful to the source material and is still really bad. So there's really no predicting these things. Who is Supergirl in this?
Helen Slater.
From
the movie Supergirl, and let me see. She was in a television show called Supergirl. That's actually not a joke. She is. She actually
Supergirl?
plays Kara's adopted mother on Earth, which is a nice little nod.
Has there been a DC television series that did not feature a previous actor who played the title role? Because I don't think that they've ever not done that.
I am going to have to say you are 100% correct. It is almost a necessity, because I think Dean Cain plays her adopted dad, which is great.
When the old Flash is on Flash, and
right.
Smallville had Christopher Reeve in that one episode.
Exactly, and it's pretty great. I mean, the CW shows, I haven't been following The Flash for a while, but I did watch it for a couple seasons. Supergirl, I usually only watch when Superman shows up, and Arrow I don't watch at all. But I will say they have a charm to them, and there is talent involved, and I do appreciate that they find a way to pay homage to their roots, and I think that's great. And I am fully expecting to not think this movie is great, but I'm almost fascinated. A few months ago we celebrated, I showed my good friend TC Superman for the first time, which I know you're not a huge fan, but I absolutely adore that movie. And watching it most recently, I was able to admire the craft of the film and really just kind of appreciate just how much it paved the way for superhero films. And Supergirl is almost like the crashing halt before Superman 4 really, really killed it. But I'm interested in watching it from that perspective of just like you said, why was there's this time period where people were just like, what do we, I don't know.
Well, as you know, there's only one Superman movie that I enjoy, and that is Superman 3. So I'm fully expecting to go into this one and be pleasantly surprised at how much I like it.
Can you explain to the people at home this inexplicable love for Superman 3?
Okay, so I adore Superman 3. I saw it on Sci-Fi Channel for the first time sometime it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was just flipping through the channels, and it was just starting, and I knew nothing about Superman 3. The only thing I knew about Superman 3 was they referenced it in Office Space. And so I watched the entire thing, and my jaw was just agape the entire movie, because I was just like, what is happening? How can this get crazier? I mean, Richard Pryor is the main character. Superman splits in two and fights himself, and we get evil Superman, who's not even evil. He's just a jerk.
He blows out the Olympic torch.
And
he destroys alcohol bottles by flicking peanuts at them.
And then it all culminates in him fighting the bad guy who wants to control the world's supply of coffee. He fights his mom, who falls into a computer and becomes
his sister.
The computer.
It's his sister.
Was it the sister?
Trust me, I know.
She seems much older. Either way, she falls into a computer and becomes the computer, and then he has to fight her.
What do you think that's saying about society?
Are we really?
Are we the computers? Is the main character of life just a famous comedian? And are we integrating with computer? I think Superman 3. Come to think of it, I mean, it truly has. There's a lot in there. There's a lot to unpack.
He skis off a roof. Richard Pryor. That was the scene, I think, where I was like, okay, I'm in love.
I love this.
This is a perfect movie.
Way better than Superman 1 or 2. Way better.
It's so good.
I think we can expect. So I frankly don't know what to expect. It's been so long, but I've seen snippets of this in recent time, and I've been extremely baffled by what I've seen. And I am looking forward to it strictly on those terms. I'm still a little ashamed that there's going to be a Supergirl episode of Missing Frames, but I think you and I, if there's any, I wouldn't rather do this with anybody but you, Matt.
I believe in us.
Yeah, I believe in us. Let's get to it and watch.
We
this movie.
will believe a woman can fly.
Now available to own on video cassette.
And we're back. Here on the Nerd Party, we pride ourselves in our content, the quality of it specifically. From Missing Frames to Filibuster to Time and Space, Nerd Nuptial, we're all dedicated to giving you the very best of the best. And for that, I have to apologize. Matt, what the hell is this movie? I need your help. I'm so glad you're here. I don't know what happened. This is the worst movie I've watched for Missing Frames. And you can quote me on that, people.
I have only questions and little to no answers. I thought that I had something of a grasp on Supergirl and her powers, and I would think I was wrong on all accounts.
I think not only do I think you were wrong, I know you were wrong because I, as a Superman fan, have no clue what was happening in this film at all.
I think my one prediction was that she would be weak to wood, and that did not happen in the movie.
Happen.
So
I was really hoping something inexplicable like that would happen, but instead I got so much more inexplicable stuff. I mean, where do we begin with this movie? It is everything you would expect this movie to be, just based on like general critical receptions, fan reactions, the fact that it resulted really. I know Superman 4 is kind of like that's officially the death of the Superman franchise and all that stuff. But I feel like Supergirl, there's a solid argument to be made that Supergirl is really, really set Superman 4 up to just fail miserably.
Well, I mean, with Superman 4, I think that there is and I mean, this is coming from the guy who loves Superman 3, but I do think that there's at least a charm to how naive Superman 4 is. Like, Christopher Reeves is so earnest in that movie, and it's like anti-war message is like at least like endearing, if nothing else. Like the movie is a
its
mess.
Heart is in the right place.
Yeah,
Supergirl is unquestionably the worst movie of this franchise, of the Superman franchise. Without question, this is worse than Superman 3 or 4. I was so blown away. I knew it wasn't good, but I really, really went into it like, you know what? I bet it'll be fun. I'll go into it with an open mind. And even then, I couldn't handle it. Every 10 minutes, I would check to see how much longer I had, fully expecting that at least a half hour had passed. And it never was. It is the longest 2 hour and 5 minute movie I've ever seen in my life.
So I honestly, I thought that I could just kind of have this movie on in the background and I'd be able to follow it pretty okay. So I started the movie while like playing games and stuff, and I had to stop because I was like, I have no idea what the hell is happening, and I have to give this my full attention because the opening of this movie was so confusing to me.
Well, did you know that the opening? This is a fun little fact. The opening credits for this movie cost nearly $1 million.
Well, that's a great segue because that was my very first thing that I wrote down is the credits to this movie are so lame. They are like a lame version of the Superman the movie's opening credits.
Right.
It's like the music is worse, the font is worse,
right.
The effects are worse, everything
so
is like
sad
worse.
Yeah, Jerry Goldsmith did the score, but you're absolutely right. And I hate to admit this, but I have this theme memorized because as a kid I would just memorize theme songs from movies that I liked Supergirl, I don't remember really liking all that much, other than the fact that it's like, well, this is kind of like Superman, only a girl. But the theme song has been stuck in my head since I saw it when I was like 6 or 7 years old. So I got a little thrill out of that. But you're right. I just remember, watching Superman on the big screen for its 40th anniversary, the sheer excitement, and John Williams' score is well, I think it's one of his best. I think it's the best superhero theme song, at least, ever. And I was just kind of like what you were doing. I was sitting here watching the Supergirl credits thinking, okay, I don't know why I don't care already, but I just don't. There's nothing about this that is like, yes, I'm excited.
There is some. It sets up the movie perfectly because you're getting a worse version of a thing you've already seen, and it's almost like I could imagine like a kid in the theater with their mom, and the mom kind of nudging and being like, "Look, see, it's like Superman.
Right?
This is like the thing you like. You don't need to stay at your dad's this weekend. I can be fun too."
This sounds very suspiciously like my childhood. It's all starting to fall back into place. But yeah, you're right, because the first thing that happens is after the credits, which, I love the original Superman, but I was so thankful that these credits were not as long as those credits. I was like, I can't handle it this time. But we get right into like, oh, it's the planet where the alien, where Kara or Kryptonians live. Only it's not Krypton.
Is it?
It's not even really out. They go out of their way to explain that it's not outer space, it's inner space.
Oh my god, I have so many questions about that. So we go right from credits to one of the ugliest sets I've ever seen. Like,
oh my
this
god,
movie is hideous, and like
it reminded me of like it's like the IKEA version of The Matrix Reloaded, Zion. It's basically the same thing, but like the nice IKEA version of that set.
It is like, it's just like I've seen like episodes of Doctor Who from like the early 70s that look like they had like a higher production budget for their like alien planets, but that's what it like feels like to me. It's like just a lot of like silver and like gross washed out colors, and we're introduced to Kara, who we learn immediately is like kind of dumb. And
not kind of dumb, very dumb, like inappropriately dumb for the protagonist of a film. Like dumb to the point where she doesn't understand anything. Like we're talking Anakin Skywalker in The Phantom Menace dumb. Doesn't understand anything that's happening around her, doesn't have anything really driving her or motivating her. She
likes dragonflies.
She
That's
loves
what we know about her.
She's very clearly an adult woman, but behaves like, I think she was supposed to be 7 or 8 years old.
Now, I thought she was an adult woman, but then later in the movie, they seem to imply that she's like a teenager.
Right.
So I wasn't really sure what's going on there. Where she hangs out with Peter O'Toole, who is some kind of terrorist, because he just casually steals the power source to the entire secret hidden city that they're living in. And this is after they've, of course, had several obligatory references to, like, well, that famous cousin of yours.
My God, well, it was funny because he goes, ah, yes, a tree. It's something you find on Earth. And she goes, Earth? Is that where my cousin went? And I was like, yeah, your cousin just went on a leisurely trip to Earth. Like, did no one realize that Krypton exploded? Like,
how did they even know
understand.
that happened? How did they know that, like, Kal-El was, like, the only survivor of that?
Right.
Did they, like, put him
I
in
thought
the ship?
It was so
send
funny.
a message?
Like, first of all, yes, everyone seems to know that, but also the fact that she was like, oh, yeah, of course. That was fun. They sent him on a little trip. And it was like, well, the reason they sent him on that trip is because all your relatives living on the planet Krypton are dead, but I guess that's not all that big of a deal.
Oh, man. Oh, my God. So we're immediately bombarded with so much confusing world building where
Yes.
His name is Zoltar,
Zoltar.
which is a great name. He is explaining that they live in inner space, which is different from outer space, which is Earth is outer space, and this
Yes.
wherever they are, which seems to be at the bottom of a lake in Illinois, is inner space. And he's casually messing with the little their power source, and then she throws it out a window because she's a complete moron.
Well, no. So this is what she does. So first and foremost, it's an exposition dump. Like, it's basically she's like, explain to me again how this works. Why, yes, Kara. So our world is based on blah blah blah, and it's like, all right, great. Let's skip this, please. But what happens is he has this magic wand. I don't remember what it's called, but he's like, yes, I think it's like whatever you think of, you can create. And then he's like explaining, but it's not something to be meddled with lightly. But here you go. Why don't you go play with that? And then not only does he give her this wand, he gives her the power source of their planet, as if like, here, these are toys. Just go off and have some fun. Do something fun with this.
And that's what she does. She makes a dragonfly that flies out the window, and I guess it's a pressurized city that they're in, because it starts like an airplane. Everything just starts shooting out the window. Including the power source, and so she decides to go get it back by stealing his ship that he was going to use for some kind of pleasure cruise to either Saturn or Venus.
Yes,
and
without like, really, there's no explanation. This thing gets sucked out of the plastic wrap window, and they repair it. And her parents, who Mia Farrow is her mom. I was like, is that Mia Farrow? It is Mia Farrow. She plays
in like one scene.
Right. And the best part is her parents aren't really mentioned at all. It's just her mom talks to Peter O'Toole for a little while, and then both her parents rush up to him. Nobody else seems to care. I don't know if her parents are officials or like the president or something, but they run up to him and they're like, "You've doomed us. You've doomed the planet. What are we going to do?" And then Kara is just like, I don't think she even hears this conversation. She just decides on a whim, I'm going to get in the spaceship and leave.
Which is great because they introduce this ticking clock of our city is doomed unless we get that power source back. But we never again see the city, not once for the rest of the film.
Nope. So no suspense whatsoever. Or like, they establish the stakes and then they very quickly forget about that.
We never once see. There's not like a scene like in Spaceballs where you see the planet that's running out of air and everybody's like, "Oh, if only we had air."
Right.
Like, there's no scene like that. It's just forgotten about completely by everyone, including Kara, because as soon as she gets to Earth, she pretty much just starts sticking around.
Well, she gets there, and they talk about, like, we'll never see our daughter again. You've doomed her. And she's just chilling in the ship, just kind of like,
she's just sitting, and she goes through the scene from Willy Wonka where they just put whatever footage they can find up on screen to be what she's flying through.
Yes.
Only adding to the confusion of where she was.
Yeah, she doesn't seem concerned in the slightest. And then when she gets to Earth, she's Supergirl.
She just has the costume. She just has it already, and that's... So, I mean, I'm so confused by so much of this movie, but one of her powers throughout the movie seems to be to instantly change her clothes and appearance.
Yes.
Well, not the first
which
time.
Is really, Matt, I know we're a couple of guys, but if you were a girl, wouldn't that be one of your like biggest wishes? Is I, as a girl, wish I could do my makeup immediately. That's what girls want. They just want powers. They can change their clothes. They can put on makeup. That's what girls are all about. That's what Supergirl really taps into.
This movie seems very confused about what women do and do not want. But the first time that she changes her appearance, she has to do it in like little stages.
Yes.
Where she like changes like her upper torso and then her bottom. But then for the rest of the movie, it's instantaneous. And she does not even get glasses in her disguise.
I think I said that in the first part of the episode.
You did.
I'm completely wrong. She does not. She just changes her hair, and that apparently is just as effective as glasses. But I just remember being so confused. So she has the Supergirl suit. It has Jor-El's family crest on it. So it's like, why does she have the L family
cousin,
crest? I guess if they're cousins, maybe, but that still doesn't make sense. And then she is immediately there isn't any conflict for her or any growth for her, because she's immediately like, oh, I can fly, I can shoot lasers. There's like not a learning. There's like a learning montage, but it's not learning. It's just she can do anything immediately, and there's no struggle. There's nothing.
She
just
starts
flies
floating around casually, and we get into a very leisurely paced montage of her flying around, and she has a very strange body language when she flies. I think she couldn't quite decide if she wanted to do the traditional kind of like one fist at the chest and one fist out that Superman does, or if she wanted to kind of just slowly flap her arms to the sides, which is also a choice. But one thing that really confused me, I'm a real stickler for, like, if you're going to tell a superhero story, you got to have the, like, Spider-Man scene where, you know, where he's in the alley and he's kind of like, I can stick to walls and I can shoot web, and he's like learning his powers, because you can't take for granted that everybody just knows what the powers are, because we don't. And there's like a scene where she shoots her lasers at a flower and it makes it bloom.
Yes.
And I was like, so does she not have heat ray? She has like life ray? But then later in the movie she just has heat ray.
She picks the flower, so she's killed it already, and then she somehow brings it new life, and she's like, great. And I'm like, you killed the flower, first of all, but also your heat vision didn't burn the flower. It gave it new life and helped it bloom.
Very, very strange. But let us not forget, because while we're being introduced to Supergirl and her very leisurely powers, we are also introduced to the part of the movie that I'm the most fascinated and confused by, which is our villain, Selena.
Who I think her friend, this is great. I wrote down this line because I thought it was so brilliant. She goes, they're talking about like, oh, the bills. I mean, this is later. This is, you know, she's introduced at a picnic for some, like, it's like, yes, every witch is just hanging out by a lake, hanging out with their boy. But later on, her assistant is just like, we've got so many bills. The only way we're going to be able to pay these is to form our own coven. And I was like, well, all right.
So this is something that I really did not feel like was sufficiently answered. Is she a actual literal witch who already possessed magical powers, and her powers were enhanced by finding the power source to the city? Or was she some sort of crazy person who like just kind of thought she had powers and like lusted for magic powers and was kind of like being bought in by like con artists, and then was given like real powers by this like sphere that she finds that Kara lost? Because it's not really clear, and I'm very confused.
I don't think the screenwriters knew, and I think what they were trying to establish, because she's very together, and she's wearing elegant clothing, but I think it's like, oh, she's interested in this and she considers herself a witch, but she doesn't have any powers. And then she gets this thing. But just like Supergirl, there's no real learning curve. She's just immediately like, yes, this is what I've been missing. And she uses it to turn. I remember her boyfriend's like, you're not going anywhere. I got the keys. And then she turns the ignition with her magic orb. And I think that's what it was supposed to be. But then for the rest of the movie, it's like full committing to her being a witch. Like she lives in a creepy, fun, haunted house, like a fun house, and
which she already did beforehand. She doesn't like move to one. She'd already been living in a carnival,
right? Because they had to pay their bills, and the coven's the only way they could do that.
Oh my god! I mean, let us not forget her first line when she's introduced is like, beautiful world, I can't wait to conquer it.
So they set up her goal like immediately. It's like, all right, she has a solid goal. I know what this is, and then she spends the rest of the movie not trying to conquer the world. She just wants a guy to fall in love with her.
Well, she is very successful at one point of at least conquering a town with her motorcycle helmeted guards, but we'll get there. So we're introduced to her and her evil carnival ride that she lives in.
Well, did you hear on the radio when she turns on the car, there's a very quick broadcast.
I made a note of this.
Because I was like, how are they going to explain where Superman is the whole time? And there's someone must have watched a rough cut of the movie, and they were like, oh, we don't we never really addressed that. So they have a really brief radio broadcast come through on the car that's just like, Superman has gone somewhere far, far away. He's
on a
really far
peacekeeping
away.
mission to another galaxy.
Right.
We're like, best of luck, Superman, on your peacekeeping mission to that other galaxy.
Very effective way to explain why Superman doesn't show up in the movie, except in picture form.
So after being introduced to our villain and seeing Kara fly around for a while, we are introduced to the first of many problematic scenes in this movie, as Kara's first human encounter is with a comical, bumbling pair of sexual assaulters. One of which is Max Headroom, the actor who played Max Headroom and is in like a million other things. But he's the one who has a line that I wrote down because I was like, Jesus. Where Kara says to him, "Why are you doing this?" And he goes, "It's just the way we are."
Matt, you and I are so in tune because I wrote that exact line down.
Oh my God.
But I thought that was
really gross. It's a really gross way to like open this movie, and to have then to have them like very like blatantly be like, no, we're gonna like take you and have our way with you, and then she defeats them, and then we get this like joke line where one of them's like, "Hey Bill, let's not tell anyone about this," and it's like, oh my God.
Yeah, it's not exactly the rousing action sequence we're all hoping for when we see. Well, I think that's the narrow-mindedness and the limited thought capacity of the screenwriters to think the only way to like have Kara confront a crime is to have it be like a attempted assault on a woman by two creepy men. It's not at all. The set pieces in this movie are not at all heroic. It's all very low, and a lot of this has to do with the budget. But it's like they couldn't have had her once like stopping a robbery or something like that we associate with a superhero, like, oh, she foiled that person. It's very, like, in an uncomfortable way, very sexualized. And, like, this is a PG-rated film for kids. Like,
it's really gross.
It doesn't seem appropriate.
It's like, when I think Superman, the kind of things I think is, like, okay, well, this isn't Superman, but do you remember the scene in Power Rangers the movie where the train is going to go off? The train is going to go up the rails, and then the bird Zord flies in and completes the track so that the plane can the train can like go across the tracks. That's the kind of thing I imagine like Superman doing, where it's like, you know, that's like a way to
you could have just referenced Superman the movie when
Does
Superman,
he do that in Superman
actually is the tracks. I love that you're like, this doesn't happen in Superman, but it does happen in Power Rangers.
Okay, I couldn't remember if that was something Superman ever did, but I was like, that's definitely something the Power Rangers do. And maybe Superman could learn a thing or two from those Power Rangers.
But that's the thing. You know, Superman, obviously, it had a larger budget. Though $35 million for a movie in 1983, that's a pretty... I don't know what that amounts to, but that's probably something akin to like 100 million or so, probably over 100 million in today's dollars. So how this movie looks so terrible and its effects look so bad, and how they couldn't afford just maybe a grand heroic gesture. Because to speak to your point, to me, what makes Superman so special is this guy is the most powerful being in the universe, but he is all about, I'm going to protect people. I can do anything I want, but it matters more to me to protect people. To me, the appeal is you get to see this guy help people and save people in need. And Supergirl has one moment like that with a runaway bulldozer that I guess we'll get to later on.
I don't even think I would count that because she bungles that so hard. And I'll tell you, and speaking on this movie's budget, I can tell you there's multiple places where the budget did not go. Because we have a Supergirl fight not one, but 2 invisible monsters over the course of this
Yes.
movie, which is amazing. But before we get there, we are introduced to Middlevale. Is that the name of the
Sure.
town that she?
Sure, why not?
Middlevale, this like private school that she sees from a distance and is arbitrarily just kind of like, I guess I will disguise myself and go to this school.
And I want to point. I want to point something out here. This is related to the fact that there's not a period of time where she learns how to use her powers, and almost immediately she understands like social normities, how people function, how to interact with people. And even more hilarious, she decides to go to the school and go undercover, and she also knows her cousin's alias. Like, oh yes, Clark Kent.
I wrote that down too. How the hell did she know who Clark Kent is?
Right.
She would have
She
no
got to
way
Earth.
of knowing.
Right. If he's done his job, and he is in disguise, and she wouldn't know that. And it's also like, wouldn't she seek out maybe like Martha Kent or somebody who could help her? I'm not even going to go down that rabbit hole.
She doesn't. Not only does she know who Clark Kent is, she knows Clark Kent's job and the people he works with.
And she doesn't she doesn't understand like, oh, I don't. What is a tree? Oh, how interesting! But she knows how to use like a typewriter and knows what a Daily Planet, like what a newspaper is, and
she doesn't know what trees are, but she knows what a newspaper is. I didn't even think about that while watching it. That is very true.
So she writes up this letter in order to make an excuse, and I love. Oh, this is another like. It feels a little misguided that she gets her name from Robert E. Lee. Like she's like, oh yes, Linda Lee.
Oh God!
I thought that was a nice little touch.
Here's a weird bit of synchronicity that I want to talk about in this movie, because the headmaster of the school, who we only get like one scene with, but was making a lot of big choices. His name is Mr. Danvers. So this brought me down a really weird rabbit hole because we're doing this in honor of the big screen debut of one Miss Carol Danvers, a.k.a. Ms. Marvel, a.k.a. Captain Marvel. And I was like, that's a really weird coincidence that they would use Danvers. But then I looked it up, and like that was Supergirl's like alias at a time was Danvers.
Huh.
So there's like, I mean, I don't think it's parallel thinking, because when it comes to DC and Marvel, it's not parallel thinking. It's just constantly stealing from each other. But it is like, for whatever reason, both superpowered, blonde-haired Marvel superheroes with like a similar sort of power base and kind of like backstory, both use the name Danvers.
Interesting.
So she goes to her first potions class with Professor Snape, where they're all working on computers. And we are immediately contradicted. The one thing I thought I knew about her was that she was very dumb. And then they have this arbitrary scene where she outthinks a calculator. Which doesn't go anywhere or ever like come back. It's just there to kind of be like, what, but how did she know that?
And everyone makes fun of her. They're like, ha ha, you're so weird. Nobody thinks like, oh, that's actually weird, but like, how did you do that? They just make fun of her because that's what girls do. They tease each other. They they just hang out naked in their dorm, their common rooms.
Yeah, they hang out naked.
I loved
the dean
the guy the guy Danvers is like, everyone, and they're like, he's coming up, and he just barges into their rooms, and it's like, doesn't matter, who cares. The girl, she's like, oh, I'm not decent. He's like, oh, you're such a liar. And it was like, wait a second, is this allowed? Are you allowed to do this?
And we meet Lucy Lane.
Lucy Lane. Oh, my sister Lois. Yeah, that was great.
Oh my God.
And he mentions before he leaves, he's like, oh, be careful with this one. She's an orphan. And then he just leaves.
It feels like there's like a series of unfortunate events thing going on where people are just naturally prejudiced against orphans, which was a little strange to me. So she ends up rooming with a small world Lucy Lane, who is Lois Lane's sister and has a giant Superman poster on her wall. So we're talking about how she knows what certain things on Earth are, and she doesn't know what other things on Earth are, which brings me to one of the most baffling scenes to me, which I think was around where I fell asleep and then had to finish it this morning. So there's a scene where she and Lucy are talking, and Lucy's talking about how she's got this cute boy coming into town, and we'll get to him, but while she's talking, Linda Lee is taking this bra of hers and like putting it on over her clothes, like she has no idea what this thing is, and is kind of trying to like figure it out.
Even
and then
though
she's
she's just seen Lucy in a bra, like it's like this is very clearly how it works and what it's for.
Yeah, and presumably is, number one, wearing a bra herself in her like human clothes disguise, but number two, like, they would have bras on her planet, right? Like, surely somebody at some point was like, "This is some like Krypton." Is it like in Star Wars where there's no underwear in space?
I think that's
is
it.
There
I think
no
that's probably how they
underwear
justified it. Yeah,
on Krypton. But it's such a weird moment. It's like I can only imagine that like the actress just started doing it, and they were like, "That's funny. Keep that in. That's funny."
That's like it's like not motivate like. She doesn't seem to have a clue what's happening. She doesn't really have a motivation for what she does. And then she does really stupid stuff. So the movie makes it very hard. And I feel so bad because Helen Slater she seems so sweet. And I think it's so awesome that she's in the TV show Supergirl, and that they were able to call back to her being part of this movie, and she was able to at least get some sort of due out of it. But I feel so bad for her. This is her first movie. She's very sweet and endearing, but it's like the movie just paints her as a complete moron the entire time.
She's very passive.
Yes.
She just reacts to everything in the movie. Like, you could almost make a nice argument that Selena was the protagonist of this movie because she's much more proactive. Speaking of which, this is problematic scene number 2, where Selena...
Only number 2?
Well, there's a lot. So Selena runs into a hunky boy that she decides is like, this is my destiny. I have to get with this hunky boy, whom she like calls over in like a weird porn setup to like do some repair work or something, or do some gardening because he's a gardener,
right? And she magic roofies him basically.
Yeah, and she magic rupees him to like date rape him, and then like. It's so creepy. There's so much creepy stuff in this movie where she magic roofies him, and then he like wanders off before she can have her way with him. So she magics a bulldozer or whatever to like go grab him, and it like terrorizes the town. Which there's so many holes in logic. I mean, they say like we have to get him because the first person he sees, he will fall in love with. But he's wandering down a crowded street, and you're like, he did not notice anyone.
Yeah.
And so he's like wandering down, and she sends this bulldozer after him. That it's like it's not a bulldozer. It's one of those like crane things to scoop up rubble, I guess. But like with the intent of scooping him up. And thankfully, we have our. I almost called her Carol Danvers. We have Linda Lee and Lucy Lane and Jimmy Olsen are nearby, and we're introduced to Jimmy Olsen. Jimmy Olsen, who is so he's like he's like Superman tokenism in this movie. He's just kind of there to be like, "Hi, I'm Jimmy Olsen."
Yep, that's it.
Doesn't seem particularly excited to be there.
No. And this bulldozing scene is one of the set pieces of the film. This is supposed to be. This is also, like I said, there's never a moment where Supergirl really gets to like, yeah, way to go, Supergirl. This is that moment. And it doesn't feel like that moment, but it's also so pathetic. And I was just comparing it in my head to like Superman's first big appearance in the original movie is like gold. It is absolutely perfect. And I was just in my head thinking like, God, every right note with that is just completely off here. There's no heroism. There's no building to this moment. There's no relationship or character to root for. Everything is wrong. It's just chaos. And then Supergirl flies in and kind of I guess, saves him, and he
she
sees her and falls in love.
completely bungles it because, and this is something that I was losing my mind watching this scene. So Lucy Lane is like, I'm gonna save him, and she climbs into it to like stop the machine, but then is like knocked unconscious and like left in this rampaging piece of construction equipment. And so Supergirl flies in to heroically save the day, where first she kind of like puts out a fire by draining the town's water supply. So that's great. Thanks for that.
She destroys the water supply.
She destroys the
water
water
supply.
supply.
Through a water tower. Which, again, how does she know that's what it is?
Oh, my God. So, and then she, like, pulls the mouth of the machine off where he's sort of, like, closed in there. And then she flies away, leaving the unconscious Lucy Lane just in the driver's seat.
Right.
And she never goes back to, like, stop it or save her or anything. She just, like, opens the jaws of this thing. And, of course, she's the first one that he sees. And he immediately is like, I love you, and starts, like, kissing her. And she's, like, into it. And it's so weird for so many reasons.
First of all, it's hysterical because he goes, oh my God. The way he says it is so funny. And I was already in stitches.
He's horrible, this guy.
I was already in stitches. And then he stands up and he goes, I love you. And I think he says it exactly like that. And to be fair, she's a little weird. She's kind of like, I don't understand. And he kisses her and she doesn't kiss him back. And she's kind of like overwhelmed. And they're trying to play it off as like this innocent, sweet sort of thing. But it occurred to me at this point in the movie, I realized, I'm like, this is the plot of this movie. The love story in this film is basically this guy's been put under a spell to fall in love with the first person he sees, and Kara has no clue what love is, but now she's in love with him because he's attracted to her, but none of it is based on character or relationship.
Nope.
It's all based on circumstance and the fact that this guy is under a spell. So it feels really like, in keeping with this movie, it feels really awkward, and it doesn't feel remotely you don't care about the relationship. It's not even real.
Yeah, it's just really gross. It's a really like gross. I mean, because he's basically under the influence of like a mind altering magic, and she is this like mind of a child kind of like alien figure, and we're supposed to kind of like root for them just because they're both conventionally attractive. And it's just I wrote several times in my notes, this movie makes me very uncomfortable. So that's one big action set piece, and very shortly
I really like I also want to this is the plot of the movie, by the way.
Yeah.
For people who haven't seen it,
It's them fighting over a boy.
the plot of Supergirl is and it's funny because we're living in an age now where female empowerment is like, yes, let's get some great stories out there. We have Captain Marvel coming out. Female representation, especially in like big blockbusters, is a big thing now. And Supergirl is heralded, maybe not heralded, but it is kind of the first official female-led superhero movie.
Yes.
But everything about it is all the worst possible cliches of, like what we were talking about with Catwoman. Like, oh, a villain made of diamonds. That's what the women want to see. But, like, the whole plot of this movie is an evil witch gets access to something that grants her unlimited power, and she decides to use it to get a hot man to fall in love with her. And the rest of the movie centers around that man falling in love with Kara. So Kara has to rescue this guy she's now in love with from the evil witch. That's
it
the plot
all
of the
centers
movie.
centers around them vying for the affections of this one man.
Right.
There is a moment where, much later in the movie, where Selena, the evil witch, kisses him in front of her, and she treats it as though she has like stabbed him. She's like, no.
It's the most like emotional Helen Slater has been in the role up to this point, and it's literally just like, I stole your man, and it's those are the stakes of this movie. I just need to get that out there because that is the plot. It is about two women fighting over a man.
Very empowering, very progressive. So that's one of our big set pieces, and we very quickly end up in another set piece because Selena wants revenge. So she attacks Linda, who she thinks is like the one responsible for all of this, at her dorm with something.
Just invisible. We can't get it. We can't afford it in the budget. Just make it a shadow monster. That's what we'll call it. And it'll just be Kara flying around on strings, being thrown into buildings.
Several points during which you can clearly see the harness that is holding her up in the sky. And so like a bunch of clouds come and like something attacks the building, and then she fights back by taking a light post, getting it struck by lightning, and then shooting lasers out of it at an invisible monster. I mean, like, what did I even just say? Like, what does any of this mean? It is so baffling. Like, they just had, I think this must have been like a Star Trek V situation where they had a big, grand ending in mind, and they were just like, oh, we can't do any of that. We have to just have it be whatever we can get our hands on.
Right.
Yeah, scale it way back.
We've already spent $1 million on these opening credits. We need to cut some corners.
So the entire budget went is on that. So she fights something and then defeats something, I guess.
Right, and then she ends up at an amusement park. I can't remember what the reasoning is, but she goes to.
She has a
park.
Tracker on her wrist.
Right.
She has vaguely used to track the orb that she's trying to track down.
And the guy shows up and is like, "I love you, my sweet," and he's talking very Shakespearean
and flowers.
Right. For some reason, he's talking Shakespearean, and that wins her over. She's like, "I am in love with you." And at this point, I'm like, okay, this is so weird. This guy, she's in love with a guy who's only in love with her because a spell's been cast on him. Am I supposed to be rooting for this? Am I supposed to care about this? I don't care about anything, but I especially don't care about this. And then I can't remember the sequence of events. She gets him. She saves him. Flies him away in his bumper car or the wheel or whatever, and she's nuzzling him like, I love him so much. And then she brings him to the beach. He gets hit in the head with a coconut, but I think the spell is broken for some reason. But then he immediately he's like, I've got to find. Well, the spell's not broken because then he's like, I've got to find Kara, and she's like, Kara's fine, it's okay. And then they just start making out. He's like, okay, great.
He's like, I gotta find Linda because I love her. Yeah,
that's right, Linda.
So he's just fallen in love with her arbitrarily, even though the spell is broken. It's like the love was real, so he just loves her genuinely, which is, that's great. Big fan of that. And then this is where my brain started to really kind of turn off and get fuzzy. So Selena is like, my powers aren't strong enough, so she calls Professor Snape back in, and he gives her the goofiest looking magic wand.
Right.
So magic is real.
Let's talk about that. She's like, I'm too weak. I must call my male friend to help me cast the powerful spell. I thought that was
the only way.
Again,
and why is he an expert on magic? Like, there's no reason for him. He's a math teacher, and he's an expert on black magic for reasons that are never given. He talks about having a bunch of grimoires, and that's the only explanation we get as to why he's a master of black magic. But he can't use any himself because he never does once over the course of the film. So he gives her a magic wand that amplifies all of her powers for it amplifies the orb for some reason. Like, there's no reason why those things would be connected. So
they manage to get the boyfriend there. They do the whole thing where Kara gets trapped and sent into the Phantom Zone.
Okay, we got to talk a lot about this because how the hell does she know what the Phantom Zone is?
I don't know.
She calls it the Phantom Zone.
The Phantom Zone is a Kryptonian prison set up for Kryptonian criminals. It is not like something that like, oh yes, we just tap into the Phantom Zone. I'm pretty sure it was like, I could be wrong. It's a dimension that was tapped into by Kryptonian scientists, and they're like, "That's where we're going to send our prisoners. We have the only means to get them in and out." But in this movie, it's something that the evil witch is able to tap right into, and she sends Kara off to the Phantom Zone, which, by the way, looks a lot like the set that was the climax of Fan Four Stick. It's just like
it does, yes,
a dark, deserted planet,
which was also another dimension. So,
I think that is true. And then in one of the most brilliant callbacks in cinematic history, Zalthar, is that his name? Zalthar?
Yeah, Zaltar.
Zaltar. He's there. Because earlier he goes, I must go to the Phantom Zone, and then we cut away from that scene, never to return. And only he did end up in the Phantom Zone, apparently. And the Phantom Zone, the inescapable prison for Kryptonian criminals that can be tapped into by humanity, apparently, it now has a very easy way to exit. And
yeah, it's really not hard to get out of there, but she needs a man's help to do it because, of course. And so while all this is sort of happening, Selena has summoned this like dark magic castle in the middle of town, and enslaved the whole town with an army that has come out of nowhere, and she's like throwing parades for herself.
Yeah.
Where Professor Snape is tied up on the back of her car, and like Lucy Lane is like protesting,
yeah, and
like,
Jimmy. Oh, I love it. This line taken out of context is perfect because Jimmy like restrains her and he goes, "Lucy, this is not a good time to express yourself." I was like, wow.
That is so emblematic of so much of this movie.
But did they just take a villain plot from a completely different movie and just shove it into this movie? Because it's like, yeah, there's a gothic castle, an evil witch. I don't understand, Matt.
Although I have heard, and you're the Superman expert, but like, isn't Superman's one of his weaknesses is magic?
Yes, it is.
So
yes, it is.
Maybe that was, which I only know because there's an episode of Smallville where that comes up. So I think maybe that was why, but I highly doubt it.
Originally, Christopher Reeve was going to be in this movie, and Superman was going to be incapacitated by Selena's magic.
Is that true? Is that what's really going to be the plot?
Yeah.
Is that? Oh my God. Okay.
But Christopher Reeve at the last second was like, nah.
Thank you, Christopher Reeve. Yeah, that would have been. Oh man, that would have been real bad.
Well, Kara, she escapes. She has her final showdown, and her final showdown consists of her friends are all in cages, and there's a spiky floor, and she's like, "Your friends are doomed," and Kara goes, "No," and I'm like, "Wait a second, can't you fly? And don't you have super speed? What's happening?"
She has super speed only when it's convenient to the plot, because I think she only uses it the once,
right?
When she has to write her resume,
right? Exactly. And then the floor starts being all weird beneath her feet, and again, she's like struggling to walk, and I'm like, "You can fly?"
So first she like freezes all the spikes and then blows them away, but then like a mildly shaking floor is really the thing that almost sinks her. And so as like a last ditch effort, Selena reaches into the depths of the Shadow Realm and summons forth Invisible Monster number 2. Only this time he's sort of visible.
He's a final boss in a video game movie.
It's what it feels like. I think that the final fight in Mortal Kombat Annihilation looks a little better than this, but not by much. So I think that I've never seen a movie, I wrote this in my notes, I've never seen a movie that is less confident in its own special effects.
Yeah,
like they were just like, do not show much of this monster.
100%.
Like I don't want to get a good look at it.
And then she flies up or it grabs her and
grabs her and starts stretching her.
Is that what the effect was supposed to be? It looks really bad.
It's stretching her, but it's not in his hands. It's like on top of his hands. And then as she's getting stretched, she's literally like, I can't do it. And she hears Peter O'Toole's voice like, yes, you can. And that's all she needed. That was
that's
all
it.
The inspiration.
She saves the day. And then she says, I have to go return this to my home planet.
Well, hold on. because before she does that, I have to talk about the way that she defeats Selena for good. Because it was very confusing. Because she breaks free and then she shrinks? ? I was very confused by this effect. She shrinks into a little glowing ball, like a fairy, and then starts spinning around Selena so fast that she becomes a tornado.
Right.
That sucks up both Selena and the poor assistant, who is clearly just in over her head and should not be punished as well.
No. She just wanted to pay the bills.
She just wanted to get her bills paid. She was like, and she even at that point in the movie is like, I'm out of here. And Selena's like, oh, no, you're not. So they both get sucked up into the cyclone and then thrown into a mirror. But like into like the mirror world or something. It's not clear what happened. The mirror doesn't like break. They get like thrown into the mirror and it's like whoop, 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 and they like disappear. I don't know what happened. I don't know how she can shrink. And then we get a triumphant moment where Jimmy Olsen and Lucy Lane start kissing. It felt like it was supposed to be the culmination of like a movie long romance, but they've only really been in like two other scenes together.
And they tell Supergirl's like, I gotta go, and this is my favorite line in the entire movie. They're like, no, we get it. We never saw you. We never even heard of you. And the first thing I said was, God, I wish I could say the same thing.
It feels like them being like, this never happened. We are so sorry.
We will never talk about it. But, it's funny because Warner Brothers produced this film, and then they never released it. And TriStar actually picked up the distribution rights for it because Warner Brothers was like, we do not want to release it.
Yeah, it's just, it really just boils down to like, I can get with some camp. Like that's fun, but like there's no charm to this movie. It's all just like really gross, and like like we said, it all revolves around the trying to get the affections of a man, and like who can like better manipulate the man, and just like the action is like underplayed and unimpressive, and it is just boring and stupid. Like it is. There's no real like. I can't point at one thing and be like. I guess her costume looked good. I don't know. Like there's nothing like I can look at and be like, well, at least that, Whereas like
right.
Superman 4, you get John Cryer's great performance, and that really saves the whole movie.
I don't know, Matt. I guess we'll do our final ratings. So on a scale of, I guess on a scale of 1 to 5. What floating, spinning orbs, with 5 being the highest and 1 being the lowest, what would you give Supergirl?
I guess I would give it probably like a 1.5. I don't want to give it like the lowest rating because I feel like there was people in it trying, and it didn't like offend. It did a lot of times.
I'm gonna have to give it a half star. This is the I'm not kidding. This is the worst movie I've watched on Missing Frames. I don't. God, it was so bad. And I mean, as a Superman fan, I knew this was gonna be bad. It doesn't really affect my love for the first movie, but this is so atrocious. It is such an example of what happens when you have people who have no clue what a character is or how to make a character likable, or they've never read a comic, or maybe they have. The comics of this era were pretty ridiculous, so who knows? Maybe they did read comics and were like, well, it's stupid. But there's something about it that is just so off-putting and so out of its element. I don't know. I couldn't get behind it. This is terrible.
They laid the groundwork well for Catwoman to come in
and blow
15 years
open.
or so. And it is very much like, and the worst thing is that like what happens with these movies is you get a bunch of like 50-something like white dudes, sometimes older, in a boardroom together, and they're just like, let's make the superhero girl, let's make her hot. And then the movie does horribly because nobody gave a shit. And then they're like, well, I guess that's it. Girls just can't be in superhero movies. Hey, we tried and the people just weren't interested. This has happened like, they happen like again and again and again with like this and Elektra and Catwoman and like all these movies. And they think that the problem is the like female lead. They think that is what's wrong with these movies. And
Right.
it's like, no, these movies are terrible because nobody gave a shit and nobody was trying. You know,
Exactly.
There's no love in any of this.
Oh,
And,
but hopefully, we're recording this before we've both seen Captain Marvel. Hopefully, Captain Marvel is good. And hey, I mean, I know you weren't a huge fan, but we had Wonder Woman, which was I really enjoyed it. All I can do is hope for the best. I can only hope that we've learned our lesson and we'll never make another Supergirl movie like this ever again.
I think things will turn around. I think that I mean, at the very least, Supergirl fans have been vindicated by having a television series that is popular and successful.
Right.
So, I think the nice thing about this whole experience is this is the past. I mean, we still have a long way to go. But, it's nice to see that, like, things have gotten better, at least in regards to, like, female representation and things like this, and, like, genre films like this. So here's hoping this is the dawn of a new era and that in 30 years we aren't right back here talking about, Captain Marvel being the exact same movie as Supergirl, which, if it is, I'd be a little impressed.
I would be, too. And I've got to say, as terrible as this movie is, I've thoroughly enjoyed being able to chat with you about it. And Matt, you are doing so many wonderful things. Can you tell the good people at home about your wonderful show, The Saga of the Shining Emblem? I want to hear all about it, and I'm sure they do too.
So I am doing a show right now with the lovely Sam Kessler at my side called The Saga of the Shining Emblem. It's a improv show where we bring up a member of the audience and we kind of guide them through a totally improvised adventure where anything can happen based on their choices. It's sort of like a one-person live-action Dungeons & Dragons, only there's no dice, no numbers, and it's much, much dumber. And we are touring. We're getting ready to go to Baltimore, and we'll be heading out towards Albuquerque, and we're going to Iceland this summer, and that's just the beginning. And we're also launching within the next month or so a podcast spin-off of the show called Shining Emblem Gaiden. And hopefully Mr. Shawn Eastridge will appear in every episode, every single episode.
I would be so honored. And where, if people should so desire, can they follow you on the Twitter? Can they find you on the Instagrams?
Yeah, Instagram. We're Saga the Shining Emblem on Instagram. Find us on there. Look for the pictures of my face smiling, and that's all we post every single day. There's information about the show there. ShiningEmblem.com is our website. You can find out more info about the show there, and just, there's a hero in all of us. I believe that there's a hero in all of us.
That's one thing that Supergirl has definitely taught me too. And I, if you so desire, find me at YeShondorman on Twitter. You can also find the Nerd Party at Join Nerd Party on Twitter and the Nerd Party on Facebook. Matt, I'm just glad we're done. We watched it. It's over.
I think now that I've seen this movie, my life is complete, and I can die happy.